Good afternoon and welcome to the City of Helena City Commission meeting, administrative meeting or special meeting. June 2nd, 2021, 4 p.m. Madam Clerk, I see a blank screen here. Did you mean to share something? Oh, there it is. Welcome and thank you for participating in the City of Helena City Commission meeting. We are pleased to be able to provide this alternative meeting format in the city's effort to broaden public participation. Please be patient as we may experience technical difficulties during the meeting. We welcome your public commentary. Please read the following tips and guidelines for the app usage and your participation. This meeting is called to order. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll, please?
City Attorney Joden.
Here.
City Manager Harlow Schelk.
Here.
Commissioner Halliday.
Here.
Commissioner Dean.
Here.
Commissioner Logan.
Here.
Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Here.
Mayor Collins.
Here. Do we have any recommendations from the Helena Citizens Council? Ms. Perry?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
Perry, Treasurer of the Helena Citizens Council. For starters, we appreciate your giving us this additional chance to learn about the proposed 2022 budget. The HCC met last Wednesday, May 26th, for our final discussion of our report to you concerning the new budget. And we spent another 2 hours respectfully discussing each of the funds. It brought on a lot of discussion. At the end of our meeting, we voted unanimously to approve our report. And hopefully you've all received a copy of it. If you haven't, please let Peggy Benkelman know and she'll send you another copy. And we hope you'll have time to read it before we formally present it to you next Monday, June 7th at the commission meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perry. Department directions, feedback needed. Madam Halshock, you have the floor.
Hi there. Good evening.
Good evening.
Afternoon, everyone. This is the page 2, I think, of the last meeting working session. Really, it's a continuation of working session 5, but in the big picture, really 6, prior to the submittal of the preliminary budget. And I just want to go back quickly over the process so that you know what is happening next. I understand that this is a different process than you all have had in the past and definitely different from last year. So I want to make sure and revisit it again. And I'll also be incorporating it into the revised budget message from me so that you have it right out the outset. So we will on June 7th be, I will be submitting the proposed budget to you as the preliminary budget. Then we'll have public hearings in June on the 28th. We will begin the formal adoption process. Within that process is the opportunity for the commission to make edits and make, so once the preliminary budget is adopted and in accordance with statute, the city can begin to make amendments, but that's before adoption, excuse me, I'm reading the wrong sentence, apologies. The commission can make amendments to the budget via motion following the public hearing, which is again scheduled for the 28th. And as part of the adoption of the preliminary budget, once the preliminary budget is adopted, then the city may begin spending on July 1. That's the official first day of the budget fiscal year. Now, the city commission budget itself is formally adopted in September, and that's in accordance with the fixing to the tax levy. And that's according to state statute, which must happen by the later of the first Thursday after the first Tuesday in September, or within 30 days after receiving certified taxable values from the Montana Department of Revenue. So the incorporation of all of our revenues and then final amendments may happen at that time in September. Again, all amendments to the budget can happen once the preliminary budget is heard in public hearing. So this evening, I'm just making more time available to you to ask any further questions around the preliminary budget as submitted, and then as far as the second draft, and then any other clarifications you may have around that adoption.
Thank you, Madam Hall-Schalk. Do we have questions for the manager?
Mayor, I have maybe just one process question first.
Please go ahead, Commissioner.
So I think in the past when we've done this, so we hear the preliminary budget and then schedule the public hearing. I think what I'm hearing from you and I think consistent with what we've done in the past is we hold that public hearing on June 28th. So we open the public hearing, we take public comment, we close the public hearing, and then the commission can take action, including amendments on June 28th to the budget.
That is correct.
Okay, great. I wasn't sure if there was with the September date, but I think it essentially we're adopting the final budget on June 28th.
You're adopting the preliminary budget. The final budget is in September. So September, you can actually make amendments to your budget if you choose to, all the way up into that September date. But that preliminary adoption is the one that we need to hit on the 28th.
Okay, great. And then maybe just a question for the commission. And I don't necessarily think that this has to be discussed or decided today, because really this is action that would be taken at the June 28th. But I do wonder if there's merit to thinking about sort of a formal process for submitting amendments so that the commission has the opportunity to look at those. I know there was some informal discussions, that happened to give folks a heads up on possible amendments, but some, we didn't really get to see until that evening. So I wonder if that's something maybe that we could discuss at a later date, following the hearing or the action next week to discuss what an amendment process looks like. I don't know if that's been done in the past. It seems like it's been kind of informal, but that would be something I'd be interested in discussing.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think so too, because in the past, when we've had those amendments, they were just brought upon without us going through a formal process. So I don't think it's a bad idea. Thanks for that. Any other comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner Dean.
I would also be in support of a specific process like that. One thing that I think would be helpful is to have an analysis of those within that process, an analysis from staff to tell us what this will or won't do to the budget if adopted. And so including that in some sort of process, I think would be good.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, when you say an analysis, I just want to understand it for myself. When you say you want an analysis from the staff, what do you mean?
I mean, for the staff to review the amendment that is proposed and then provide an analysis, a summary as to what that would do in impacting the budget.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mayor, I mean, I think we could talk maybe more about what that looks like. I think it will ultimately depend on what the deadline is, right? If we're, if we want to set a deadline for ourselves that we have amendments completed, say a week in advance, that we're giving the staff the opportunity, that hasn't been the tradition. You know, I mean, some of the amendments that I think were being proposed were fairly last minute last year. So I think that's something for us to decide, right? Like how much time are we going to provide in advance? My preference, I think more so than sort of any sort of analysis would be, I think it would be really helpful to have the exact dollar amount that's being amended from what fund and into what fund, right? So that would be, I think, the information that I think would be helpful for us. And certainly we could get some analysis, I think, from the staff as we're discussing them as well.
Right.
Would you want to include the rationale as part of that? So exact amount from and to, and then rationale.
Sure, that wouldn't hurt.
Well, and let me just say, I mean, these are amendments from individual commissioners, right? So I think that's a question, right? Like who's providing that rationale? In my mind, it's the individual commissioner that's proposing it. So I think, and again, I don't think we don't have to land on this today, but maybe queuing up a conversation in between preliminary and the public hearing so that, you know, whatever format is easy and straightforward. But I don't think it has to be a justification from staff if it's an amendment that's being proposed by an individual commissioner.
Okay,
Do you, can I offer up another suggestion on that vein?
please.
In the there's substantive and then there's non-substantive. Do you want to get into that clarification of, you know, at what point do we need to go into further review as staff just to accommodate the request of that further analysis? So by that I mean do you want to adopt you know, obviously this could be a norm you all adopt in this process where you're making these motions and providing those amendments details, but if there's a substantive, would you want to discuss here what that might look like for all of you?
I think so.
I'd be in favor of that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've sort of seen this done differently in different contexts. I mean, when you look at like the state budget, you know, they just have every amendment that's being proposed with the dollar amount and just sort of like what it is, right? That is essentially, I think, what we had in front of us last year. We just didn't have it in advance, right? So I'm not suggesting that we have a lot paragraphs of justification, but if we want an X dollar amount for a particular program, just getting that even, you know, 24 hours in advance.
Okay. Thanks, Commissioner. So, any other comments or questions for the manager?
Well, Mayor, we didn't get a chance to talk last week about some of the changes that were made to the preliminary budget. So how best do you want to handle this discussion? I mean, I've got probably, you know, 5 or 6 different funds that I was hoping to ask some questions about.
And Commissioner, I think that's why this meeting was called, for that purpose. So yes, we're going to handle it that way. So you have
Okay.
the floor.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to try to go in order, and I'm also, maybe I'll take a couple and then I'll let other commissioners jump in if they have similar questions or topics. So I guess just one quick question related to the commission budget 011 general government. So I know in last year we did the City of Service grants, and there was a process in place. And I'm just wondering if someone could remind me I know that there's some funds here articulated for, say, the Sun Run, and I think Symphony Under the Stars. Are we moving forward with a similar process that we did last year, and what's the timing of that?
Thank you. No, we are not. There's two things going on. So this is on that first page on just looking at 011
Mhm.
under. I just want to make sure we're all looking in the same space. I'm trying to get to that. It's on the second page in under grants and contributions, other miscellaneous. So the what you'll see are the city of service grants as a total. Those are being pulled out and moved into one line item that is a donation to a grant, a donation to the Helena Community Foundation. The city agreed along with the county to, for those grants, the city of service grants, those grants that are within the community, the city really isn't equipped to manage grant processes. So the community foundation has really stepped in and said, hey, we can do that. But then there's also these other city sponsored events. So the Sun Run is a city sponsored event, Symphony Under the Stars, and then the MBAC operational support. So those are sponsored events and activities. That's the distinction we made as opposed to those grants.
I see. Okay, thank you.
You bet.
And then one other question, and I can't remember, I know it's reflected in the general fund, but I can't remember where now. I believe there was a COVID savings reserve. And I believe, City Manager, you referenced this in one of your emails about using like 700,000 of that for something. Can you remind me what the status is of those funds?
Sure. So great question. The CARES Act provided funds to the state, which the city received reimbursement of our expenses in response to COVID. Those reimbursements resulted in general fund savings within fiscal year 20 and 21. So those dollars are anticipated to be spent this year, and we have not had this final conversation. We have a $1.3 million balance. And the email to you all shared that we have a number of options. Those dollars, because they are general fund savings, are within my spending authority from the budget this year. So we have not only laid over opportunities for spending from the original conversation we had, but also we have a need to address a balancing of the transition, including the potential for grants to the nonprofits in the community as well as businesses who've shared what the impacts of the transition look like. In addition to that, there's been new projects and ideas that have come forward. So we believe that we would be able to spend those dollars in fiscal year 21 and would not need to move those dollars into the new fiscal year. But the question I think you're asking is there a reason why it's not in this budget? And that's why we are anticipating spending it in this fiscal year.
Because I think that, I mean, so the way that I'm reading this, it's marked as a negative 1.4 million in the document that we got most recently. I mean, you could just classify that as freed up general fund dollars, which would help address sort of this structural balance issue, right, into FY22. And I'm just wondering what if that was considered rather than use it for other purposes.
Thanks. No, I'll go ahead and I see Sheila, our finance director, is here. We've been having lots of conversations around operating needs in FY21. But Sheila, do you want to weigh in on that conversation we had around the 1.4?
Yes, thank you, Manager Holoshak and commissioners. We ended up, because the full COVID savings were set aside as to be earmarked for the city manager and or commission to designate how those monies were spent. Because we hadn't designated all of the 3.5 million, we pulled the 1.4 out. It hasn't been expended, and there's really no line item to put for it to be expended. So it was just a management tool to make sure that those remaining dollars, at 1.4 million, was taken out of the fund balance in order to designate it as city manager discretion funding. So it doesn't, it would fall into the same category as that. It would just, if it wasn't there, it was just going to go into reserves. It doesn't solve what your definition or thoughts are around structural balance. It would just still need to be spent on one-time dollars, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does. And I mean, part of the reason, because that 1.3 is almost about the amount that is being, I think, proposed as a transfer into the 440 fund, right? So why not just use it as that? I mean, that's an additional new one-time expenditure. And I'm wondering why we wouldn't sort of classify this freed up general fund dollar in that way, perhaps.
Thank you. That's a good question. There's been a lot of conversation in the last several weeks and around other needs. So we've got sidewalks, we've got an open lands need, we've got golf, we've also got the businesses and nonprofits. So because those dollars were really intended to address these gaps in what COVID impacts we've had, those were the priorities we started with, but that does not mean that we could not. And again, the focus here is not on the structural balance. It has been on just balancing toward the state's expectation of it. And by moving those dollars out, we lose the ability to fund things that need additional dollars, like we could put $880,000 towards the Safe Routes to School program, for example, or $100,000 towards sidewalks in the 6th Ward that we're working on, or $100,000 in this open lands potential match with Prickly Pear, just to set up an indexed position. Those things were not brought to them because they're separate conversations within the FY21 budget. So we were operating and focused on the FY21, not anticipating moving these dollars forward so that we can address the needs also of the businesses and nonprofits in the community too.
So, I mean, I appreciate that when we've had, expenditures come in, general fund less than what we projected, that money goes into the reserve. We're doing it differently this time. I think it's just worth noting. There's nothing to say we can't fund those things into FY22, right? And almost certainly those expenditures would happen into the next fiscal year. It almost feels like it's a little bit of like this tricky thing of like, I'm going to hold 1.4 million in the current fiscal year, and I'm going to spend it next fiscal year, but I retain the authority to do that. I mean, why not just have that conversation in a transparent way as we're looking to the FY22 budget, especially since there's new additional expenditures into 2022.
Yeah,
that's just my 2 cents, I suppose.
I appreciate the consideration around transparency. The idea of the commission was that we would revisit it in May. When we were having these conversations, it was in May, and I wanted to observe that original conversation around the spending as discussed the first time we went through.
Okay, well, I think it's open, right? 1.4 million is there for us to discuss. So that's helpful to know. Thank you. I'll go ahead and hold if others have questions.
Do we have other
Yeah, I mean,
comments?
I guess just a comment on that. I mean, not going towards the idea of applying it towards structural or legal balance, however we want to describe it, or wedding that money to any specific use today. But it does, when I read the memo last time regarding expenditure of those funds, whether it's 1.3 million or 700,000 or 500, depending on how you do the math, it struck me that given all of the different things that are being thrown out there, whether that's sidewalks, whether that's open lands, we could talk about Centennial Trail and its needs. I don't see any reason why we don't have a meeting to actually discuss that as a specific action item. That would seem like the best and most straightforward way to do it, rather than kind of having on the fly where we keep sort of coming up with different potential ideas that are kicking around out there. I think, about 6 years ago, when something like this happened in a settlement situation, we had a meeting to discuss what to do with the $1.9 million that came in as sort of additional unexpected revenue. We sort of did that with a portion of it. We're left with this 1.3, 1.4. We've had a lot of other ideas come up in the process. Managers outlined some of them. Commissioner O'Loughlin's mentioned ideas about balance or using it as reserves. Why not just have consensus as a commission to say, let's put an official agenda item on it and talk about it. Whether that happens prior to the 28th of this month or afterwards shouldn't really matter. But that would seem like the most straightforward and clear way to address this money.
Thank you. I guess it's interesting that it's difficult to push back on you all, knowing that these dollars are under my authority to decide. And I actually opened the door for these conversations early on because I wanted to have them with you all in making these final decisions on how the city would spend these CARES dollars. So I agree, having a conversation outside of the budget process and inside the fiscal year 21 makes sense. We've already identified a variety of needs, and creating new needs in a new fiscal year and removing my authority to spend those dollars in this current year seems to feel as though there's another idea on where we could be putting those. And I guess the intention of using them to balance structurally gets at this, again, policy issue that is it a policy of this commission that structural balance trumps all other activity within the budget? I don't know that that's been resolved.
And again, I'm not advocating for the use of these in any form. I'm actually just asking the commission if there is consensus to have a conversation at all. I don't think we should be having that conversation today. I'm just asking whether we want to have a conversation over $1.3 million of what's functionally taxpayer money sitting in reserve. That's all.
Commissioner Halliday, please, would you repeat what you said? I think in the last sentence or so, you went very low.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for whether we use that money for, small business loans that have been talked about. COVID transition has been talked about. I've heard sidewalks thrown out there. I've heard structural balance. I've heard legal balance. I'm not advocating for any of those. But what I'm wondering is whether or not the five of us want to commit to just having the basic public conversation about that, because so many different ideas have come in. That's all I'm asking is, do we have that conversation as a body, or are we just going to say, no, we don't feel like it?
Mr. Mayor.
Commissioners?
I think that, so previously, Manager Holoshaw came to us with a list of the current needs and asked us for her feedback. I think that she's done a good job at coming to us, for other things that are within her authority to ask for feedback. And so I think it's, appropriate to give her the time to figure out how she believes that money within her appropriation authority should be spent. And when she's ready to come to us to ask for any feedback that we might have, I'd expect her to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner Dean.
So I got cut off, unfortunately, but I mean, I think the challenge with this is that the city manager is coming to us with additional new expenditures in FY22, right? That exceed our revenue. So I think it's sort of one of those things where, can you have it both ways, right? Like, can you hold this money in a fiscal year that we have 1 month left, that we're likely not going to expend 1.4 million, and then also add, $1 million in a general fund transfer to the capital fund and an additional general fund transfer to the golf fund. I mean, I think I have a hard time understanding how we give latitude, but also budget for this year. So I think that, that might be just a differing opinion, but I think that, I think about the legislature, the governor had the authority to spend down the funds in 2020, but once the legislature is in, right, it's subject to approval of the legislature. And I don't know that this is all that different. We are headed into another budget cycle, and we have 1.4 million tucked away essentially in this fiscal year.
So how does that exceed, Commissioner O'Loughlin, you said the 1.4 million exceeds the budget?
Well, I've never seen it accounted for like this. We're essentially pulling out $1.4 million of revenue. It's a strange way to account. If we had freed up general fund dollars that weren't expended in the last fiscal year, why aren't they just reflected into the balance? And again, I think if there's merit to spending those dollars on the capital improvement fund, let's have that conversation. But it's not that we're not spending those. We are spending those dollars already.
And I'm trying to understand it. How is this not transparent when we're discussing this?
Because there's $1.4 million here, but it's not, there's no articulation of how it's going to be spent.
Right, we've asked, yeah. So a couple things that I don't agree that we are offering to you a budget that exceeds revenues. I'm offering to you a balanced budget within the state. What you have described as the year-over-year concern, which is not the same dollar amount, and the one-time dollars are around 600,000. So what we're really just talking about is $900,000 of concern. And as I've shared before, those dollars come in. But in the big picture, whether or not the community believes they have, and we have had conversations with them around the use of these dollars for those one-time transition expenses, those are all things we have not had a discussion around. So I don't know that it's a lack of transparency. I feel like I've sent you all various messages on needing to do this and wanting to make sure that we also get through this budget process. Because I recognize that it's so different for you all to have the city manager adopt the budget and bring in a budget and then also to have a final budget. I get that. But also, these are dollars underneath the current authority. They've been put into the roll forward, using them to balance the budget fictionally which is really the long game of fiscal stability, only addresses the one-time issue, and we already address it using the dollar. So what we're setting up in this budget is the first time an actual reserve policy exists. Those reserve policies set out enough funds to cover not only the budget, but those reasonably cover those expenses within operations that need reserves. So what we're talking about to balance the budget are dollars that otherwise would be spent sitting in a reserve. So it doesn't matter, I guess, to get to your point. The ultimate outcome of the additional dollars is the establishment of these reserves. Having a reserve policy frees up these, and they're called excess reserve dollars. Those excess reserve dollars are being used to balance the budget. And as we've shared just at this point, going to the final budget, we will then revise them based on the chargebacks, and then additionally the revenue that's received by and returned by September. So for us, I feel like we're being extremely transparent because I have offered up a ton of revisions to the preliminary budget as a conversation before actually submitting it to you all. So that's the distinction. Is I believe that this reserve policy creates these excess, and it's the conversation is the excess used to balance the budget, or is the excess used to be moved forward in another way? I'm using them to balance the budget. That certainly is something that you all can introduce as amendments.
Mayor.
Go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
Thank you. It seemed to me like we did previously deal with a lot of this, whether it was through meeting or through the balancing act tool that helped us, give feedback to the manager about these funds. And so I guess I'm comfortable with the manager's approach, and am certainly willing to move forward with that.
So maybe just a question, Mr. Mayor, and I think this all dovetails with the information only presentation we had last Wednesday. So we had received an email on Monday or Tuesday of last week discussing the remaining dollars, about 1.3 million, 1.4 million, whatever that range is, and a suggestion that we expend, approximately 760,000, I believe, on golf, healthcare, dental, vision. Right, that had never been a thing before. Clearly, there's something going on in the budget. The manager is suggesting we address that. Then we had the information only piece of it. So my very, very rough math, and I apologize, I'm terrible at math, is that would leave us somewhere in the range of like 500 some odd thousand. And then the manager's email indicated a 50-50 split to send that money to MBAC for loans and the Community Foundation for grants. Am I recounting that, in a word or two, manager, correctly in my math and understanding of those emails from last week?
So yeah, we had gone through the balancing act earlier this year, and in that info only, we had shared there's a request to accommodate appropriation and spending authority. We need to move. We already have funds. My suggestion was, instead of using those additional savings that are currently within the general fund to really revise the spending authority, was instead to use the current spending authority within those COVID dollars, those general fund savings dollars, and cover those expenses. But we still need to go beyond the adopted spending authority. So there's a distinction. There's the spending authority, which the info only is a summary of those things that are beyond the adopted budget. So if you would like to have another presentation about why those items are above what was adopted in the appropriation, certainly we can have that. But then there's the second question, which is what do we do with those general fund savings? So I, again, had offered up that could be because the spending authority already exists for those dollars, or I could decide to use the total appropriation to split, as you said, about $600,000 across the Community Foundation and to MPAC for grants to nonprofits and to businesses. So putting the money back into the community for this transition out of COVID, as opposed to reducing the amount available in a carryover. So really responding to the commitment we had had. Now, whether or not I can get those dollars out the door, I do believe I can transition those $600,000 to those two organizations for the community in response to all of the surveys that they had completed when we asked for what they really needed to support them in the community. So I would hate to ignore their information in an effort to move these dollars forward. And then on the other end of it, we still have the reimbursements. So as part of that email, I had also shared the summary, which was of what we had done in the Balancing Act. And in the Balancing Act, we'd spent $80,000 on irrigation and 1.2 in the Housing Trust Fund. Those are all things that had been items that we had been, and I'll just share my screen if that would help. Those are all items that had been discussed within the Balancing Act tool already. So I can certainly send them back out, which was, I believe, the intention of this conversation was to get to how would you like to spend these last ones? Now, I hear you, Commissioner O'Loughlin, you'd rather just move all of those dollars forward and get to a different conversation around that 1.4, but here's the balance of those things that we had talked about could be funded originally, and that was in the beginning of this year. So these items are still sitting out there. We also have new items that have been discussed, and that was to arrive back where we started, which is the open lands and safe routes to school and sidewalks. These are all conversations that have happened in the last 3 weeks. So we can address these issues, these one-time issues with these one-time dollars right now on my spending authority and not have to go through an additional layer of a new budget process in another way. And as far as the budget goes for the state's budget process, as I understand it, the governor submits his budget, and then there's amendment opportunities based on bills submitted. So similar to your point in a process, if the intention is to move these dollars out from underneath my spending authority and instead I have been incredibly transparent with you all in sharing how we're spending these dollars, and instead put them back under the authority of the commission, I would question as to whether or not we're actually having a different conversation around the authority of the city manager to spend the dollars, as opposed to having a collaborative conversation around these general fund savings.
Yeah, I'm not, so never once did I suggest that you don't have the authority to spend dollars in this current fiscal year. So
Thank you.
I never said that, but I just want to say, if you look at the finance citywide ERP software upgrade, the 1.5 million, we authorized you to expend those dollars. That's not going to happen in this fiscal year. And those dollars are reflected in the next fiscal year, right? That expenditure is projected in the next fiscal year. All I'm suggesting is that we reflect this 1.4 million in the FY21. It is revenue that we're not spending, and then articulate how it's being spent in 22, right? It sounds like you have already plans. I think just for transparency purpose, I'm not sure why it wouldn't just be reflected in the FY22 budget so that we can see how they were spent now that we're in a budget cycle, right?
Can I just, Mr. Mayor, so
Commissioner Halliday, you're breaking up.
So I appreciate the explanation of how we were spending that money in the past and how we divvied it up. I guess my curiosity is, so we have a proposal that appears to account for all 1.3 million on the table, right? It sounds like we're dealing with shortfalls in the healthcare funds, or what looks like maybe employee contributions from when I read those funds. I couldn't quite tell, but this goes back to my other question. So let's say I'm a downtown business and I'm very excited about that proposal. right? I'm going to take advantage of the MBAC loan. I'm a nonprofit in our community. I'm excited about this idea that the city is going to pump in about $250,000 into the community foundation. During this meeting, we've also discussed prickly pear. We've brought up sidewalks. We've brought up safe routes to schools. I'm just curious, at what point, as someone in the public, do we know what the direction on the expenditure of that money is? That's my curiosity, because the presentation on the loan piece and the shortfall in the funds accounts for all 1.3 million. I'm not saying that's the right approach or the wrong approach. All I'm saying is if you adopt that approach, you cannot give money to prickly pear out of that pot. If you adopt that approach, you cannot give money to safe routes to schools. If you adopt that approach, you cannot give money to sidewalks in the 6th ward, because ultimately there's only $1.3 million. If you adopt that approach, you can't go with the idea that Commissioner O'Loughlin has proposed. And so somewhere something has to give. And that's the only question I've asked is, are we gonna, how do we ultimately provide certainty and explanation to the member of the general public of what the expenditure of those funds are and what the decision-making process was? Right now, we're sitting at loans, grants, and backfilling shortfalls. That appears to be what we've been told the consensus is at this point, but there have been other ideas. I'm just curious, like what is the decision-making process on that?
Mayor Collins, may I address the commission?
Please go ahead.
Commissioners, I wanted to clarify the budget amendment that was in the information only. We will be bringing that as a resolution of intention forward on the June 7th meeting. That was just as a notification to let you know that that was coming. In regards to the health, dental, and vision funds, there is no revenue shortfall in those funds. I'm proposing an accounting change. And so in order to move forward with that accounting change, the actual appropriations have to be increased to allow for 13 months of expenditures in fiscal 21. And then in fiscal 22, we will drop back down to 12 payments. I'm not exactly sure what the accounting procedure was in the past, but it just, I was unsure why they held back expenses for the month of June and didn't start recognizing them until July. But my proposal is to recognize the expenditures, which would increase the actual appropriations, but the revenue, there is no revenue shortfall in those funds. No further revenue is needed. If you look at the fund balances in those funds, the revenues do cover the expenditures. It's just the increase in appropriations to allow for 13 periods in one fiscal year so we can move forward in fiscal 22.
And again, I'm really not trying to get us sideways on that piece so much as, let's say we all agree we want to do that approach, right? I mean, if anyone here thinks funding prickly pear is a good idea, then you can't, and we're not going to have that discussion, right? If anybody here thinks safe routes to school are important because they don't seem to be in the new budget we're talking about tonight, right? That discussion is by the wayside as well. And so I'm just checking in again, and at this point, I'm seeing 2 in favor of additional discussions and 3 against. So I'm going to take it that we're not going to have additional discussions on the 1.3, and I'm going to assume we're just moving forward with the business grants, the community foundation, and the budgetary piece.
No.
No,
Sorry.
am I misunderstanding that?
Yes, thank you. No, my hope is to tonight get your buy-in as a group to restart that balancing act tool, ask you for your input on how you would like to spend these dollars to include these additional items that have come up in the last several weeks, and then come around at a commission next commission admin meeting and clarify, much like we did last time. So we take the balancing act tool, add in the new items that have come up since, you submit your thoughts on what would be best, and then we come to the next admin meeting and then get to a consensus on these are the kinds of things. I have 3 who responded this way, 4 who responded that way, because I already have the authority then we would have the opportunity to move in the appropriate direction and then distribute those dollars as you all agree would be within your consensus.
Thank you, Manager Halshaw. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Halliday?
Not quite. I mean, I think it helps. I think I'm relieved to hear that we'll have some form of discussion on it. I think that's a good thing, whether you like the current plan or just like the current plan. Discussing the current plan is what I'm concerned about, right? Process in this case. Right now, we're not having any of it potentially. So I appreciate that and I like the process. Thank you, Madam Manager. The one piece that's hanging out there for me is, let's say a commissioner is really excited about astroturfing the entire golf course with the remaining money. That's just like my bailiwick at this point. How do I get that proposal into the balancing act tool? Because if we sort of put the sideboards on it with, you know, send it out with these proposals, how do I elevate my you know, exciting golf course pet project onto the balancing act?
You talk to the manager, she would put it in there.
Right. The list of items that were put into the original balancing act were items that had continued to come up over time.
Yeah.
So the items that I've been tracking and have been shared to you all are items that I've been, in listening to all of you, are items that you have all talked about really wanting to support and fund. So last time you all agreed that I had been listening and offering up this opportunity to use the balancing act in response to them. So again, we would move into this list that is already established of items that were discussed earlier this year. If you wanted to add additional items, certainly you can do those. I can set a date and we can get that out to you all. I can get that balancing act link out to you all next week so that we can have the conversation during our June 16th administrative meeting. And under the manager update, so that we have time for you all to look at those items. Again, these are the ones that have already been discussed, and then we move those dollars in appropriately in an amendment.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Do we have any other comments or questions? Commissioner O'Loughlin, are you through? Because
I have questions on other topics, but if others have questions, I'm happy to hold mine.
Please continue, Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Okay, so I think one of the big changes in this latest preliminary budget that we got were some changes to the Civic Center Fund 211. So I was hoping we could talk a little bit about that. It looks like we're now projecting revenue for the Civic Center 300,000 above what was previously, and my numbers might be a little off. And then I had a separate question about the capital outlay, but I'm just wondering if you could provide maybe a little bit of detail on what changed over that sort of 2-week period that we're projecting 300,000 more in revenue to the Civic Center.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. I know that our finance director, Danielson, really vetted these dollars with the Civic Center and really was concerned with a revision. So I will definitely let her answer the question as she received a confident response from the team.
You have the floor, Director Danielson.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioner. Yes, when we were originally putting together your original budget, I had gone through the revenue projections for the Civic Center and conservatively forecasted them. During that time, there was a new manager hired at the Civic Center, and he had his proposal on what his revenue projections were. And it was too late at that point to put his projections in the document. I did push back on him a little bit and Director Pinozo about making sure that there was some narrative as to why they believe the revenue projections were going to be as high as they were. And Director Pinozo and the manager of the Civic Center came back with their plan and had definitive forecasting on how many events they expected to book, how many ticket sales they expected to book. And I was satisfied at that point that if that's what they wanted to project and that's what they believed the activities were going to be at the Civic Center, we went ahead and revised their revenue. So in addition to revising their revenue, that allowed them to increase their expenditures, which I originally discussed with them about pulling out so that they would have a positive fund balance, because there was a negative fund balance. So we had to reduce their capital outlays and some of their equipment expenditures in order to just get them to a positive fund balance. But after those revenue revisions, we increased the appropriations to match the forecast.
Okay, thank you. So Director Danielson, I know we've talked a little bit in the past about the general fund subsidy to the Civic Center, which is 90,000 above what we provided last year. Why not, if we're projecting higher revenue, why wouldn't we reduce that general fund subsidy by a similar amount, or at least, you know, back down to what we provided in the last fiscal year?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Offler. I did suggest that to Director Pinozo and the Civic Center manager, and they believed that because of the lost revenues, their reserves are still not meeting the reserve balance requirements, and wanted to continue to request that same subsidy from the general fund so that they could build their reserves at the Civic Center. So that was one suggestion that I did recommend, but as you can see, it's still not meeting the reserve requirements. So they requested to have the subsidy at the same level as it was prior to the revised revenue forecast.
Okay, thank you. And maybe just one more question, Mayor, on this. So are the capital outlay expenditures contingent upon the revenue coming in, or is that something that the finance department can look at, you know, as we head into this next fiscal year?
Yes, Commissioner O'Loughlin, that is an excellent question, and that is a conversation that I did have with Director Pinozo and the Civic Center manager, is to make sure that those revised revenue projections are actually coming in before they go out and make those capital improvements and the purchasing the equipment. Yes, that was a concern of mine, and we will be monitoring it with them.
We also have a tool that, just to jump in here, that Sheila is adopting as part of this process, which is a finance hold on items in those areas in which she is most concerned, where there are revenue holds. So she has, and we are implementing those processes in those areas of greatest risk. I would say to you, there is really not only one of the largest events and ticket sales have been staggering on, but the number of events has increased. So withholding would happen if in fact there was some sort of massive pandemic again that would result in a massive loss, and we are not in that space, thankfully.
Okay, thank you. I have questions on other funds, so I'll just pause in case other people have Civic Center questions.
Please continue, Commissioner.
So I will just apologize that I missed the presentation from the Parks Department, and perhaps this was discussed, but I'm looking at we haven't really had a full conversation about the 440 fund, the capital improvement fund. You know, one of the bigger ticket items in here for expenditure is Kendrick Field. And I'm just curious how, and maybe this is a question for Director Panozzo, how we're thinking about this in the context of the previous conversations about a minor league baseball team. You know, I'm just wondering, is this an investment that we feel like we need to make now, or would it actually make sense to hold for further conversations to see what other partners could come to the table I think it was $250,000. So pretty significant expenditure. So I was just wondering how this plays with the conversations about a potential minor league team.
Manager?
Thank you. So there are two teams who are working together at Kendrick Field. The field itself, because there will be so much activity on it, will yield a significant impact. And the investment is into and support of that increased usage. Certainly I can share over to Director Panozzo to talk more about the reason for the different type of turf and why it represents a longer term solution as opposed to a one-time delayed solution. So instead of deferred maintenance, we're, and in fact, a potential where we could have closures because those fields are now impacted beyond use. This is really the intention to be more proactive. So Christy, good.
You have the floor.
Mayor, Commissioners. Yeah, there are two items in the 440 account, Kendrick artificial turf. The other item is Kendrick bleacher replacement. That is to accommodate the ADA transition plan. That's been on our capital improvement list for quite some time. And we feel a very important upgrade that needs to happen to Kendrick Legion Field. The artificial turf was part of the discussions that we had with both Legion, Helena Legion, who does have a contract to occupy the field this year, and the Expedition League, who responded to our request for proposals this winter. Both expressed interest in wanting to use the field. Scheduling both of them was not possible. One of the issues, of course, is overuse of the field. We have to rest the field. We can't have something on there every hour of every day. A potential solution is artificial turf for the infield. It is very expensive. As you will see, it's $250,000. I don't even know if that's the best cost estimate. It could be a little more than that. It's a significant capital investment. It does have to be replaced every 10 years as well. So that's where that came from. So if we are looking at potentially having two teams use the field, this is a capital investment, as the city manager said, that we would need to make.
Director Panozzo, are we looking at that? Because as far as I'm concerned, I know the Legion have been kicking against the Expedition League forever. They've been saying no, they didn't want the Expedition League. And so is this new development that we're looking at?
So both Legion and the Expedition League responded to our request for proposals. Ultimately, we entered into discussions to try to see if we could negotiate a shared use agreement because both of the teams were interested in a shared use agreement. We could not work out a schedule that would accommodate the field and both of the teams for this year, but both committed to, and the Parks Department committed to continuing to discuss the potential for shared use if we were able to get some of these capital improvements like turfing of the infield that would make it possible or more possible for them to share the field. So right now it's only Legion using the field. And we are going to have continued discussions, and a lot of it will depend on whether or not we can have some of these capital improvements.
So Mayor, just a quick follow-up. As you know, other minor league teams have looked at other locations. I don't know if you've had a chance to talk to any other municipalities. I'm just wondering, is this the type of capital expenditure that we might negotiate with a prospective user of the field, or alternatively reflect in a user agreement, sort of helping to pay for the cost in the long term? You know, I mean, my impression is we have at least one team that's very interested in coming to Helena, and I'm wondering, you know, is this something that a municipality might want to sort of negotiate as part of the terms? And not just the actual capital expenditure, but who's paying for it?
Mayor, Commissioner O'Laughlin, I think that is something that we could definitely consider.
Until then, though, we still have the problem, which is that the organizations the commission had requested, we seek out the opportunity to share the field, to increase usage and support the expenses ongoing at Kendrick Field. We cannot do that without making a long-term investment. Whether or not an organization chooses to come to Helena or not does not mean, though, that they would make that investment. And we turn to this larger conversation around capital, I think, and no matter where you spend that dollar, it's deferred maintenance on this field. So at some point, we either reduce the amount of accommodation, or in this case, this year, we cannot accommodate the ask of the commission, which was to look into ways in which we can really double the amount of work on that site, and we cannot do that without really impacting the field for those who could play there.
So thank you, Madam Manager. Director Panozo, why couldn't they work out a schedule this year?
Mayor, we sat down, we had 2 separate discussions where we looked at the schedule and what the potential was. I believe we had at least 10 days that were overlapping days that were not possible to schedule both. And so we were not able to work out a schedule where both could use the field.
So how would the turf alleviate that problem?
Mayor, we have to rest the field. So there are quite a few days that we have to rest the field. If we use it for so many hours, we have to rest it for so many hours. Otherwise, it does damage the field. We could take a lot of the field rest days, if not all of them, out of the schedule, and that would allow more open days in the schedule with more potential for more scheduling.
Thank you. Comments or questions from the commission? Commissioner O'Laughlin?
I do have more.
Please continue. I mean, I
Okay.
was referring to the Kendra Legion.
I don't have more on that. Thank you, Director Panozo.
I just want to clarify, Mayor Collins, that's not a directive for Director Panozo to reduce the amount of days of rest on the field. Is that what your request is?
No, I was just wondering. I mean, I was wondering because
you may want to start implementing. I just want to make sure that we're clear on where you're wanting to go next. That's it.
And I just want a clarification on why they couldn't work the schedule together this time, and why would next time they'll be able to work the schedule. So if they're working the schedule together for next year, does that mean we have to put a turf in by next year?
Got it. Thank you.
Does that mean we have to put a turf in by next year?
Yes, in fact, if you want to rest, so the maintenance on that field, no matter what I'm hearing a suggestion from Commissioner O'Laughlin is that we not pay for those and instead look into finding another organization who would make the investment instead of the city. And if we don't make that investment as an organization, those fields will continue as a matter of management of those fields to be rested in between use. That's the most responsible. We would not want to reduce this. Part of the safety on the field is our ability to maintain the grass and its site itself. So yes, we could always reduce the number of days, but that also does impact the longer term on that field.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And I'll just say, I didn't suggest that we not pay for any of it. I just think if we have Expedition League, who has shown quite a bit of interest, right? They came to us first. We didn't go to them.
Mhm.
I wonder if it's something, that the commission should say, listen, we're willing to invest, 75 or 125,000 in this, and we'd ask for your commitment to invest the additional funds. I wanted to know if that conversation has happened. And it sounds like maybe it could.
Thank you.
Thank you,
just a
Commissioner. You
question.
can continue. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Halliday.
On the turf question for the director, is the recommendation, I mean, I appreciate that the groups are working together. They've tried to work together in the past, putting aside the field rest issue, and it's broken down before. If for some reason this didn't work out and we continue with the Expedition League as we've been successfully doing for a number of years now, would it still be Parks' recommendation to convert the field to artificial turf, or is the turf in response to the expectation of two entities only? Does that make sense?
Yes, Mayor, Commissioner Halliday, the turf is in response to the need for more scheduling of the field if we're going to have two teams. If we just continue to have Legion or one team using the field, we do not need artificial turf.
Gotcha.
That's helpful to know. So, I mean, I don't think Commissioner O'Loughlin's question about then figuring out, at least in those discussions, I mean, it doesn't mean we don't budget for it potentially, but have in those discussions, because if things break down, which they've done a number of years now between Legion and Expedition, why not save the taxpayers some money if the artificial turf is only in relation to getting both of them in there?
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission? Continue, Commissioner O'Loughlin. Oh, we're moving on now.
Okay, I'm just pausing because I also want to see if there are others that have questions on the budget. I just don't want to take up all the space. So the Sidewalk Improvement Fund 450. Have we talked about this fund already and I just missed it? Because if so, I can do it later. But I didn't remember this coming up. I know that we've said we're going to talk about sidewalks, but I wasn't sure if we've talked about them.
Yes, no, yeah, we had Director.
We had a preliminary discussion about it.
Yes, we had the working session on sidewalks overall, and then there were the options, and then there was a consensus on movement. And the one item that I had in follow-up from those conversations, Commissioner O'Loughlin, was exactly this which direction are we going? And so I was going to offer up to all of you that might be a really good first amendment to the preliminary budget being adopted. And the option 5 was the in that conversation around sidewalks was the addition of FTE and 2 seasonals, but that does not address, I think, this area. No, this is correct. This would be where we would put those staff, I believe. Is that correct, Sheila? Or would you put them into the transportation budget? So it just needs to be clarified, I think, there. And then we also had the second conversation around the safe routes to school and whether to infuse money in there as well.
Thank you, Manager Holowchuk. If the sidewalk program is approved, it would go into the transportation budget and not this particular budget for the staffing.
So I'm just wanting to understand what is in the current preliminary budget. So is what's being proposed here is ending the voluntary sidewalk improvement program? Is that, or am I reading that wrong?
So thank you, Commissioner Laughlin. One of the questions that I had with this particular fund and how it operated, and there was some confusion, I think, on how it operated with the narrative that I was looking at from prior budgets indicated that the city took interfund loans from the state and then loaned that money out to individuals that wanted to participate in the program. When I looked at the actual accounting of the program, that wasn't the case. This particular fund was taking loans from the general capital fund and is currently paying, the people that participate in that program are paying back the general capital fund, but it's not a transparent transaction because it goes through a receivable and a payable and not a revenue and an expenditure. So one of the things I did was pull that out because I just really didn't even understand what was happening. And I think that should the commission decide to continue the program like it has in the past, we can continue to put the source of revenue in there, but it's not an interfund loan. It's not an intercap loan. It's an actual interfund loan, which requires a resolution from the commission in order to structure it that way. So that is why there's no information in there for fiscal 22 at this point.
Okay, that is super helpful and fascinating. I guess it would be helpful for, at least for me, to understand what the decision points are on this. Does the preliminary budget continue the voluntary sidewalk program, or is it being proposed, to end and we're doing something else, or is it reflected in here somewhere and we don't need to do anything? I think that at some point that might be helpful information. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of on top of what City Manager you suggested as far as potential amendments for additional, investments into sidewalk improvement, but just getting a handle on this current program.
I think you're right. David,
I see Director Kanapke. You have the floor.
You're on mute.
Thank you, City Manager. So this does not end the volunteer sidewalk program. The volunteer sidewalk program is one of basically 3 programs that came out of the sidewalk discussion. The first one would be the volunteer sidewalk program. And that was the funding was discussed, but not in detail during that meeting. So we just left it as it has been in the past, as that entered fund loan. And then the second program that came out, which I'll be getting this out to for everyone to review, would be the slip, trip, and fall program, which would be funded through the street maintenance fund. And then we would also have the Safe Routes to School program that once we prioritized the projects, it kind of came up with a, let's just say, a budgetary amount per year. Then we could put that in the CIP and move those forward on an annual basis.
Thank you, Director. Questions?
So David, just to ask a clarifying question, within the budget that she's looking at right now, that Commissioner Laughlin's looking at, none of the program is different, except that these dollars that have traditionally been in this account are not there. Is that correct?
Right.
That's correct. The program looks essentially the same. We did modernize it a little bit to try to streamline it and make things a bit easier for the residents, like, recommending the ADA ramps be covered 100% by the city instead of 50%, defining what the eligible features are and what non-eligible features are. So I have a document that I'll be, like I said, sending out to the commission that will outline these modernizations or high points of the programs, each program, and then we can have a detailed discussion if there's any questions on that at a future meeting.
So with regard to the sidewalks, is it accounted for somewhere in the transportation budget then in lieu of this account?
Mayor and Commissioners, so when we were preparing the preliminary budget or preliminary draft budget and having the sidewalk discussion, that's when we decided to hold off to make sure that there weren't any changes, but this would need to be either added to the 450 fund or amended into another fund that to cover the annual $150,000 for the program.
Can I, sorry, I just wanted to ask a clarifier from, I think, Sheila. Director Danielson, the dollars, they're coming in outside the city, not as revenue, but as more a loan or a grant, is that correct? And then reflected in an adoption, or how are those dollars being reflected now?
So in the, thank you, Manager Holishuk. In the fiscal 22 budget, currently there are no proceeds or disbursements in the fund, and they were pending this sidewalk conversation. In the mechanically how it's working is the Fund 440 is getting an interfund loan from the general capital fund, and then paying interest on that to the general capital fund, but then loaning that money out to the participants interest-free.
So those dollars are already accounted for in the general fund, they just haven't been loaned.
Well, I would not say that they're accounted for at this time, no. So
And I guess that was my, I'm sorry, Director Daniel.
Excuse me, they would need to be added back into this fund to continue the program for fiscal 22.
And that's what I was trying to get at with Mr. Konopke. There was my read of the budget currently is that there's no money in for slip, trips, and falls at this time, and there's no money in for the sidewalk program, although we're discussing the idea of getting those two pieces in, say, for a preliminary budget amendment pending commission consensus. You know, I will say, since we're talking about confusing budgeting of the past, Director Danielson, my understanding was the reason that it was done in this bizarre, whether you want to call it sleight of hand, is that before the city changed the improvement fund, the street maintenance fund, to actually allow the construction of sidewalks for more than about 6 feet, there really was no way for the transportation fund to fund these construction. So, I mean, for me, I guess it doesn't really matter where you put it, but it's always made sense now that the city can actually construct sidewalks out of the street maintenance fund, that the money would just come straight out of there in the assessment. And it's a lot cleaner it just gets appropriated and can be expended.
Thank you, Commissioner Halliday. Yeah, that would be my recommendation. Is I'm not understanding why this particular program has to be accounted for into a separate fund. It could be incorporated into the transportation fund if we wanted to go that route.
Yeah, we were just barred by law from building sidewalks, and we found a way to fix that. And thanks to David and Ryan in the past. So I think this is just an anachronism. And so appreciate you trying to pull us out of the literally, I think, 20th century on this one.
Okay, comments or questions?
So just for the commission, I guess, then when are we going, like, or the manager, when do we foresee the clear discussion on teeing up the discussions of slips, trips, and falls and sidewalks? Because I had those on my notes for tonight, but if we're going to have a set date, I don't want to haggle over that too much this evening.
Great question. Thank you. No, we last week met with the team, met to talk about, any further edits. I don't want to make any further edits. I want you all to have the opportunity to decide what those look like, especially on the conversation around sidewalks, because it was so clearly a part of this process and it was not earlier within the preliminary review process itself. So that said, it would be an amendment that comes in after adoption of the preliminary budget. So as part of your list of amendments, it would be in that group. Then we would bring them into the conversation. So I'm going to work on, while we're going through this, I'm working on a schedule to help try and get to that date that you're asking about as to when you would make your submittal. And I appreciate Commissioner O'Loughlin's suggestion of setting a date that you all submit your amendments and we can move them into the process in advance.
Well, and I don't know, Commissioner Halliday, if what you had in mind, but given that we have preliminary next week and then we've got a few weeks in between, when we would sort of formally adopt amendments, I wonder if it's worth having a commission conversation if there is consensus about what that amendment looks like. So City Manager, I don't know if that's what you had in mind, but I wonder if we have a meeting with some free space to have that conversation, or maybe we don't need it. Maybe you've got enough consensus that you can put the amendment together.
Yeah, we do. I think David, I sent to David the what we got out of that conversation. I'm gonna pull up the list and I can share it to you all tonight so you have it and make sure that it is in fact correct. But yes, I did get that from that conversation.
Yeah, and I'll just as a comment on it, as long as we have that conversation, because I'd like to see us talk about getting safe routes to schools money clearly in there in line items. I'd like us to at least have that discussion. Slips, trips, and falls, same thing, and funding the sidewalk program explicitly. So 3 things that are currently not in there. So whether we do that as a separate one, whether we do that as individuals bringing individual amendments.
I think we're on it now. I think we should discuss it instead of waiting or having a separate meeting and all that kind of stuff.
So yeah, I found the follow-up in listening. So one, it would be install the safe routes to school sidewalks through city investments to include bond or general fund savings and the plan for which projects go forward. So David is to prepare modifications to the budget that address that as well. Implement a sidewalk team through the use of TIF funds or other city resources for slips, trips, and falls. This staff is a staff, so that's the 1 FTE with 2 seasonals. And then third, make minor changes to the voluntary program as needed in the code to address gaps and issues that have come to rise. So those 3 parts, obviously that third, minor changes to the voluntary program in the code, don't need to be a part of the budget conversation, but the first 2, the safe routes to school and the sidewalk team, need to be as part of that.
And then maybe just, sorry, Mr. Mayor, clarification on the third one, the sidewalk piece itself. Does the amount though put into the budget for the sidewalk program have to be part of the budget conversation, even if the tweaks to the how the program plays out can be a separate determination from the budget?
Yes, it does. Yes, totally. Yes, it does. The amounts, there's this second conversation around the CARES dollars. You heard me talking about the CARES savings dollars. So the general fund savings, David had suggested 880,000 from those dollars to be put into the sidewalk, safe routes to school.
For the 3 programs?
For the safe routes to school program, that 880,000. And then as far as the sidewalk team, that's funding that we can pull from the street program revenue.
Okay.
Great. And then, sorry, Mr. Mayor, but I had a question on if people are done with sidewalks on that piece. Another sidewalk question for Mr. Konopke. I had inquired a little while ago about if we knew sort of what it would look like if if there was interest in taking out debt for Knight Street, and what it would look like to debt service Knight Street, say through the sidewalk fund, if the commission was interested in prioritizing the construction of Knight Street.
Mayor and Commissioners, we had looked at two funding options for that, one through the CARES Act money and another through your request of debt funding. And we could do that through an intercap loan at this time, or reduction in other capital projects that are in the budget currently. But we do have options to get at least the Knight Street sidewalks moving in the next fiscal year.
Great. And then I just have one last question, I hope, about the Street and Traffic Fund, which is probably for the manager or Director Danielson. I just noticed that we sort of moved a great deal of money away from debt service to capital outlay and drew down the excess reserve. And I was just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Halliday. I had a discussion with Director Konopke about his fund balances and his reserves. And his original estimates had higher debt service than what he actually was going to need. And so we reduced the debt service, and he'll be using reserves to pay for proposed capital projects, and then only go out for debt service for 1.6 million in fiscal 22.
Great. And I mean, I know we're kind of reworking the whole CCIP thing. You know, it hasn't really been on paper for about 2 or 3 budget cycles now. But when I saw that, I just wanted to make sure we feel good that knowing that there's a number of projects out there, looking forward even 2 or 3 years, that we feel okay without those reserves. We'll just convert it into debt, is what I'm hearing, or we'll take debt.
Yes, Commissioner Halliday, we do need to do a long-term forecast and look at those projects and determine how we're going to fund them, whether they come from issuing debt service or from using reserves or increasing fees. That is a discussion we'll be having in fiscal 22.
Yeah, if I may also, the capital improvement program overall is a special project for one of our teams. We have not had a specific set aside of reserve for those capital improvements, and the reserve policy that we're talking about for the general fund does not address these one-time expenses that go along with capital. And really that policy directive needs further study because they're different types of capital funds within different types of fund sources. So those are cross-department, citywide kinds of conversations that we look forward to having next year.
Any other comments or questions from the commission? You can continue, Commissioner O'Loughlin.
So sticking with Director Konopke, I just had one big picture question on parking. Or perhaps Director Danielson, either of you. So just looking at where we sit with this budget, it looks like some of the purchase services came in above what was projected for FY21. And I'm just wondering how we're feeling about kind of where revenue's coming in this fund and where we sit with, you know, the balance, ending cash balance at the end of the next fiscal year. It's pretty tight. And so I just thought it would be helpful to get your feedback on how things are going parking wise, both revenue wise, and then maybe a little bit of context of the expenditures from the current fiscal year that came in above projected.
Commissioner O'Loughlin, I think I'm going to pass that question off to Director Konopke.
Thank you, Director Danielson, Mayor and Commissioners. So, right now, parking is starting to get back to more normal revenues we're seeing. In the past, well, in May, we were getting close to what we would consider a normal revenues for on-street. We are selling more lot permits than we have in the past. And now with the governor bringing state workers back to work, we expect to see even more of an increase. June is looking really, the May numbers came in really well, and June doesn't seem to. We're hoping that it matches or exceeds with, with Memorial Day and people getting out of school, people getting out and exploring downtown. So we're hopeful that our revenues are going to be returning. The proposed budget that we have in there, we reduced our expected revenues anywhere from 15 to 20% in areas, just so that we didn't over forecast our revenues there, so that we could, if we did see the downturn continue, then we wouldn't be expecting those revenues. So we did reduce those revenues and basically matched our revenue with expenditures for next fiscal. And as far as some of the exceedance of purchase services, we had some computer things that we had to account for that came up unexpectedly. One of them was a software issue that current staff was not aware that back in, I hate to say this, Y2K, they did a patch for a 20-year patch. And as January 2021 came about, it stopped working. So wish we would have had that little, post-it note on that computer, but we were able to get that fixed and transition over to the system that we had been wanting to transition to. It just happened a little bit faster, so we incurred some more costs there. And then there was costs that we incurred over that just came in above what we expected. Some of it was COVID related, some of it waiting for, workers to return or safe working practices. So, but if you'd like a more detailed explanation, I'd be happy to provide that to you in an email.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. That's super helpful.
I wanted to add one item in the last, this COVID transition conversation. A number of businesses talked about parking as a continued problem in the downtown and attracting customers. And what I had shared back to them was this notion that the people who are continuing to park in front of the businesses are also employees. And one of the points that I thought was really a great suggestion was the intent of looking at how the parking situation in downtown could be improved to the benefit and support of the businesses, so that they're parking further up and seeing a reduced or even a waived fee related to those parking spaces, so that they're encouraged to offer up more spaces to customers as opposed to just having their staff. So just tossing that out as an opportunity that may come up in the next year that really does support the businesses and addresses some of that continued angst around business staff parking in front of those spaces.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think that this was something that, the whole goal of providing the kiosks and paid parking for that kind of prime parking was to support businesses and sort of open up that parking. And my sense is that has happened to some extent, right? Like I hear anecdotally of more people getting permits that are working full-time downtown. But I can imagine there are still some that are perhaps parking where it's most convenient. I don't know what the incentive needs to be, right? To reduce, what the balance is between someone's just sort of desire for convenience. But I do think one thing that I did hear from a lot of nonprofits in the downtown area was a desire to help provide parking for their employees, but the cost, right? So I don't know if that's something to think about. Is there a way that we could help support some of the nonprofit organizations downtown? Or perhaps there's another way, right, to help potentially reduce the cost for employees that are working downtown that are eating at the restaurants and huge economic drivers, right, in the area. So they're parking downtown, but they are using those businesses, I think, also. So I'm encouraged to hear that there's some further conversation about what can be done there. It's definitely a balance.
Comments or questions on that? If not, you still have the floor, Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Okay. This is my last one.
No, you can go on.
I think I'm highlighting some of the main ones, right, that we've discussed in the past.
Yes, ma'am.
So I left the best for last. It's also the last one near the end. And that's Fund 563 Golf. I actually wanted to just go toward the front of our packets. And again, I don't have page numbers on this version, but the debt service overview. So I have here existing debt, and there are 4 lines. There's and I don't know if someone else has page numbers that they could reference. I apologize.
It looks like this. No, I apologize. That would be us. I get to own that one.
So there's 4 existing debt that have been issued. The second one, long-term government bond 2017 for $2.1 million. And I just wanted to confirm, is that the golf? Is that the restaurant?
Commissioner O'Loughlin, yes, it is.
Okay, so what we have outstanding is roughly $1.9 million. And then when we talk about, so flipping back to the golf fund itself, so we have a general fund transfer of 235,000 proposed for FY22. And if I'm understanding this right, this is now sort of designed to be an ongoing general fund transfer to cover the cost of that debt. Is that accurate?
No, that was the point. I think that was the reason that we were calling it out to you all, is that when the general fund took the debt on to extend to make the improvements at the golf course, the debt service is still being covered by the general fund, but as a which it should be, because there's no way the restaurant could cover that debt. Those dollars, if we move them back out, and that's what we will be doing, because currently we don't have a general fund debt account in our accounting system. So right now we're making note that the general fund will be moved, these dollars, and we're just calculating that actual movement here so we can document that that's happening from the general fund into golf. But ultimately this debt will be moved out of the golf fund and back to the general fund. But we just don't have an account or an accounting method, as I understand it, in place for that debt. Is that correct, Sheila?
Thank you, Manager Harlow-Schuck. Yes, I just wanted to make sure that we reflected the transaction, the funds, and it's an accounting mechanism to transfer that debt service to a GEO debt fund. That will happen in fiscal 22.
How much is the debt payment on an annual basis? Oh, it is 235. So it is reflected in the golf course fund.
Correct. Until we can actually create the new system and show that movement is in the general fund, because we don't have debt. We don't have a debt account. It's a structural issue within our accounting system.
But other than what the commission approved last year, that was the first year we had a general fund transfer. So, I mean, it's always been a little fuzzy how this fund has balanced out, but we haven't transferred general fund dollars in previous. I mean, the golf course was, I guess, covering the cost of that debt service with their own revenue.
Is that accurate?
I don't believe so, no. I'm not sure how that has been balanced in the past, Sheila. I'm not sure that we've actually seen that.
Well, our prior
It's a great
2 years
question.
reflect that there was no general fund, right? If you look at fiscal 18 and fiscal 19, the general fund transferred a grand total of 19,000 and change to the golf fund, but the golf fund has been servicing some form of debt since that period of time. And you can see that the capital outlay, the long-term debt, was taken in fiscal 18. So golf has been debt servicing the loan for the restaurant since it was taken. Fiscal 20 was the first year that the commission chose to put that money in. There's the proposed projected amount this year, or for fiscal 21, excuse me, and then the proposed transfer this year. So those three transfers are different than the original. And that was based, again, on, as I spoke about when we discussed the Parks Fund, right? The original projections that the golf fund would be capable of taking care of this and actually making money off of it, right? Was the numbers that were presented in the study that was done in order to secure this building and this clubhouse and restaurant in debt back when 2016, 2015, when this came up. So we have, it was all built in there with the expectation, and that's how we have treated it in the past.
Right. It looks like, though, that in 2019, I don't know that they started payments in 2019 or 2018. So I would have to ask more questions, unless, Sheila, you've already analyzed that. But it looks like they did pay debt service after an unaudited expense, but there's also debt service from a second loan in there too. So there's two loans on there in advance and beyond what was listed.
So Commissioner Halliday and Manager Hollishock. So there are a couple of debt instruments in the golf course fund. They took out an intercap loan for irrigation, which they're going to continue to expect to cover. So in the future, the golf course would continue to expect to cover those loan payments. And then there's one final payment in fiscal 22 for an interfund loan that the golf course took out and is paying back the general capital fund for that. What we're specifically talking about is that GO debt payment. And so the next year's payment for the GO debt is, let's see, right around $150,000 for the GO debt service payment. And so, but because of the revenue losses for the golf course, they're not able to sustain any of those debt service payments in fiscal 21 or fiscal 22. We're proposing to move just the GO debt, the balance of the it's 1.8, 1.9 million into a general government debt service fund that the general fund would be responsible for. And then the golf course would continue to pay off those other smaller loans.
So Sheila, can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
On the debt service, so if you look at their debt service payment in 2019, what the suggestion is that they were able to cover the debt service. To move it back to the general fund wouldn't be necessary because it appears as though they can cover the debt service. Is that accurate? Because it looks like they had debt service in 2018, 2019, and then in 2020. But then we had to start covering in 2020.
Yeah,
So
and if you also, but you know, they were using their reserves in the Gulf Fund to cover those payments. If you look at the cash balances, they were using those reserves, and that's how they were covering them. It's my opinion that the restaurant, based on my conversations with the current restaurant manager and Director Pinoza, is that the revenues projections based on that study were overinflated. And I'm not saying that they were wrong at the time, but the study projected a particular revenue, and it just has not come to those projected revenues. And the city is trying to run a restaurant with government requirements around it, and it's not at this point, especially with the COVID hitting, has not been a sustainable operation to cover those debt service payments.
Okay, that is very helpful. Thank you. And I suppose that, I mean, we could consider then, what I'm hearing from you is that the full 235,000 would not be transferred over to the general fund after FY22. And so we could presumably sort of construct this general fund transfer consistent with what you are suggesting as far as covering the GO bond for 2017. Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
Comments or questions? Continue, Commissioner.
That's all I had.
she's done. They were great questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
We appreciate all the questions, and they were timely. Thank you for that. Do we have any other comments or questions from the commission? At this time, I'll open the floor for public
But
comment.
I have a
Oh.
question, Mr. Mayor. I was just.
Go ahead, Commissioner
Everybody
Halliday.
else did, out of politeness. So maybe just for the manager, just bigger picture, and I'm mostly looking at it out of the general fund, but anywhere, this commission about a year and 3 months ago passed a resolution regarding 100% sort of clean renewable energy. Before that got Mr. Judge on board, or created a sustainable position that Mr. Judge has filled. I'm curious if you can articulate, or haven't. Last year, by way of background, we budgeted about 90,000 for the purposes of doing a city photovoltaic system at Mr. Judge's recommendation. Obviously, we had some money set aside for that grant match for the electric charging stations. Thank you for getting that one done. What this year are we looking at from internal city? I know we're giving money to the solar, the Sun Run. I know we're putting out money for residents who want to do their solar loans like we've done in the past, or at least that's proposed. What internal pieces are we doing, or do we have anything proposed, I guess, in the budget for anyone who's looking going forward to see if we're making good on our prior representations regarding renewable energy and our support for, city's climate goals? Yeah, and that was, for the manager, if you've got any thoughts.
Manager Howell-Schulk?
I'm here. I'm just pulling up my my summary sheet from the city manager's office budget request. So there are two parts to the the sustainability office, first is obviously this longer term commitment, which we've been making and have gone into a larger commitment within the ICLEI organization. So the first is, yes, we're of course continuing to maintain our larger status, but we are also continuing to set aside dollars for match into those projects that we could in fact increase. So I want to get to you the itemized list that was incorporated. And I see it here, it is. So we had 60,000 for interest loans, and then interlocal policies, incidentals, waste plan. As you note, you'll probably see that in our list. And then there's $30,000 for match grants. So those are all commitments as an organization that we're continuing as far as match. Now, where those match dollars come in from, we've talked about various places. So depending on the location of the facility itself, I'll give you an example. The fleet facility is one where we are using dollars that Director Konopke is actually able to identify to make improvements for solar on his facility. So while they may not show up in direct relationship to the budget for the office, they are in fact within the expectations of the facilities team in a broader sense and inside the departments. Now, the second part of the conversation in the Troy, within our facilities group, the second part of the conversation talks about, that I've talked about with our sustainability group, is this idea of operationalizing it and improving some of our facility maintenance and management systems. So this year, there were improvements to the utility billing system, for example, that will help improve the amount of information made available to customers on their consumption that was not planned, but we were able to implement through Sheila. Then the second is the longer term commitment our facilities team is building into the budget to invest in a system that monitors our actual consumption so that we can continue our reduction. So those, by way of the operations, that is an expectation. And then operationally, I'm pretty excited about just the bigger picture for Patrick and the team itself, because I think we're making an investment that's larger than we have in the past, just by way of making it a cultural expectation within our operations.
So I'm understanding the waste plan, which, great plan, great idea. Hopefully it pans out in about a year. I'll split hairs and say that's not the 100% renewable. I get the 60 into the solar loan program, which is great. Again, that fund is probably over $300,000 now, which is pretty wonderful. So I appreciate the commission's commitment, and a $30,000 match for projects. On the 90,000 that we appropriated last year, what is the result of that money? Is it sitting there to be used on a project not yet done? Is it in process, or has it rolled back into general fund reserves?
Go ahead, Sheila.
Thank you. I believe I was talking to Director Konopke about this a week or so ago. I'll have to verify whether or not those funds have been expended as of date. If not, they'll act as a carryover into the fiscal 22 budget.
Well, and then just a comment on that, Mr. Mayor. We made a commitment last year for a photovoltaic system at $90,000. Hopefully we'll carry over that amount and make good on our fiscal 21 plans. I'd be happy to hear any commissioner's thoughts. I'd certainly like to talk about another $90,000 at a second project, even if we do them both this year. Those to me are tangibles that we can expend to really bite off these commitments that we made. The criticism that's always made of the commission when it makes these type of resolutions is that everyone enjoys the fanfare, the backslapping, the Facebook posts, the smiles and photos, and then we never actually fund. And if we fund, we never actually execute. And so, I'm hoping we'll be willing to stick another 90 in there this year, and do a second project, and support that when we start amending the budget. If anybody has thoughts on that right now, I'd be happy to talk about it, but otherwise I can move on with my other questions.
I also think it would be good for us to itemize for you, Commissioner Halliday, where in fact we're planning to burden operating dollars with those PV projects that may not show as a line item within the sustainability program. So I'll also get you that.
Cool, thank you. I guess I have another question, and it sort of bleeds into two funds, one on general fund, one on transportation. And it's more big picture for the commission. We just got this 5-point study that has been about 4 years plus in the making, with a number of recommendations that the commission gets started on, both for transportation at the 2 5-point intersections, Helena Avenue, some downtown work, but then also Centennial Trail, which has basically been on pause while this study was going on. And again, I'd like any commission discussion or thoughts. We've had people waiting and asking us for years to work on a crossing of Montana Avenue, right, to work on the Helena South Central connection from about Ewing Street up to Kendrick Legion Field so you can connect into Centennial Trail. Those are dollars that we can look at to put into transportation to get those engineering projects started so that we can fulfill the commitment to finish Centennial Trail as it crosses into the 6th Ward. And there's other dollars to work on there. So, one, I'd like to hear commission. If the commission has any thoughts, I'll certainly be bringing it up as we move through the process of committing street maintenance dollars or appropriating some street maintenance dollars for the purposes of continuing to complete Centennial Trail, which has so stalled out. The other that I'd like to have a discussion on, and maybe I'll stick it in the budgeting tool, is whether we start saving for a rainy day, essentially with the Henderson Street Bridge, which has been an ongoing request by the Friends of Centennial Trail, who donated money for years, members of our community. It's an incredibly unsafe crossing, and that is general fund dollars. And so, again, I invite conversation. We have not had much conversation on it. I'll certainly bring it up in the process going forward. But if anybody has thoughts on those two pieces today, Centennial on the streets and Centennial on the trail there, in order to make them safer crossings into the 6th Ward and to cross Henderson, I'd be happy to hear whether people would support that, whether they oppose it, whether they have concerns, or discuss it in any other way, since this is our prime opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I guess I have
I
two questions on it.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
On the first one, do we know how much we would be talking as far as like beginning an engineering process on some of the other recommendations that were reflected in the 5-point? I can't remember if that study provided cost estimates, but how much, what might we want to try to devote to this for FY22 for kind of an initial start?
Would you like David to provide some feedback on what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, either if Commissioner Halliday had something in mind, or if Director.
Yeah, I mean, I had asked Director Konopke about this previously, about sort of what that amount of money would look like, either for the safe crossing across Montana, which is such a critical piece, right? If we're ever going to sort of finish out this vision for the 6th Ward, or Ewing. Those are the two. Those are the two that are on streets, right? So there are transportation dollars available for them. Henderson Street Bridge is a very different conversation, because transportation systems and public works have explained to us in the past, we can't use, and I think the city attorney has explained this, we can't use transportation dollars for the Henderson Street Bridge. So they're two separate, I mean, we need the dollar amounts anyway, but they are two separate discussions as to the expenditure of those dollars or where they come from, because of those different pots of money.
Mayor and Commissioners, well, for example, the 5-point study did provide us some planning level cost estimates for improvements. The small 5-point intersection there at T-Mobile Neal in front, or T-Mobile Neal and Last Chance, it was estimated at about 3.5, but that does tie into MDT facilities. So we would say about 5 million, but that's for design and construction. I'm just trying to pull up your requested one at the Ewing crossing. That estimate is approximately $500,000, and then the crossing at Montana is a bit more, just because of it is going to be it will be an MDT approved project, and they're estimating approximately $500,000 there as well. So those are two projects that we could definitely, I mean, those are planning estimates, including construction. So if you use kind of the rule of thumb of 10% is a good number to kind of start with for design, then I think they would take a little bit more, but we'd be somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 to get the engineering started on each one of those projects.
Thank you, Director Kanopi.
So if I were to say propose $100,000 each, just as safe spots, placeholders for both of those, you think that would be at least sufficient to get rolling on the pre-engineering design pieces on the two of them?
Mayor and Commissioners, yes, I believe we could definitely get the ball rolling with that amount, if not get a complete design up to at least an approved design that we could present to MDT, since both of those facilities cross MDT facilities.
That's great, thank you. And I'll just say, I was in Bozeman yesterday driving on 7th, and they have done an amazing job on their center islands on 7th there, which used to really just be, ticky-tacky concrete and some curbing, to really make it's never going to be a safe pedestrian space. That road is designed to be unsafe for pedestrians, but it's amazing the thought and care put into it, that if you want to get people across, and human beings have to cross those streets to work and go to school and do business, and some people don't have a car, and it really would be a valuable commitment on two of the most dangerous places for people to cross, that we have said to the public: cross the street, use this intra-city trail, but do so dangerously. And so I hope to have more discussions on it. I'm not hearing a lot of interest in it today, but I hope to have further discussions as we move forward in the budget process on how we make that commitment to the people who have invested in the past, how we make that commitment going forward. The last, and I see Sheila says we've spent the 90,000. So awesome. So let's just look. We have it.
No, excuse me, Commissioner Halliday. No, I've confirmed with our budget analyst that no dollars of the 90,000 have been spent so far in fiscal 21, and so that would carry over to fiscal 22 if it's not spent by the end of June.
Great. So at least it'll be there for expenditure if
Right.
we want to get a second project rolling. So then I guess the other piece for David, and this might take a little bit more of a crystal ball, would be that Henderson Bridge question, which is a trickier one because it's got the moving pieces of the easement that we're apparently going to always just get tomorrow. And I don't even know, we've never discussed building a bridge, so I don't know what the engineering differences and concerns are, but what is something like that to start that feasibility study and that engineering study, putting aside the easement question, because I know we're solving that one tomorrow.
Mayor and Commissioners, yes, the check is in the mail. I think that one, it's going to take a little bit more engineering just because we're going to have to put some footings down. We're going to have to deal with the proximity to MRL. Again, it's an MDT route, so we're going to have to meet the highway standards for clearance. Ballpark, I think we could get a good start for probably 200,000 to get the ball rolling. And that's not to say that if the estimate comes in lower, then those funds could be redirected to another project or returned to reserves.
That's helpful, at least for a suggested placeholder, and just to editorialize on it. It's another reason to discuss situations where we have excess funds available, right? Whether it's the 1.3 million, whether it's other money in our fund. The Henderson Street Bridge project predates me, right? But it's a project that I hear consistently. It is a huge danger zone on that trail for anyone who has ever crossed that street. There is nary a time of day that's a good time to cross Henderson down there. It's a blind turn for a lot of drivers, especially coming from the north. For anyone traveling from the west, try going across that street during school time, fair time, anything at the fairgrounds, baseball games. It's incredibly dangerous, and you've got 6-year-olds riding bikes on it. So I hope we'll take a look and consider that. We have long-term projects that the city has looked at where we have funded little by little by little over years, and it takes a dedicated commission starting at day one to start putting that money, to get the study, to put money in the bank, and to start committing towards the people. We have friends who want to help us. Friends of Centennial Trail have said if the city will get this started, they'll look at the money they've still got in the bank. They've offered to assist us in scoping the remainder of Centennial Trail. They're willing to kick into gear on fundraising, which is, surprise, surprise, how we built part of Centennial Trail originally was relying on community organizing and support. But what they want to see is a commission that says we care about this and this is a priority and a good for our city. So I'll get off my soapbox and we can talk some more about it later if other people don't have thoughts or comments right now. Thanks.
Any other comments for Director Kanopke or the city manager? No,
Mayor,
Director Kanopke, no. Manager, what's up?
I just wanted to go over a set of dates to help set up this next piece based on what we've talked about tonight, if you're ready. But I will definitely let David, if he's needing to make sure and offer up anything, open that door right now.
Let's go for your dates right now. No, you have the floor, Madam Manager. You have the floor.
Okay. All right, June 8th, 5 p.m. How about all of you submit to me your ideas for the budget tool that we will utilize like we did last time for the 1.3 million, and to include those items, Commissioner Halliday, if you would submit those in, and I will again load in the items from earlier this year as well, the items that I talked about tonight, the 880 for safe routes to school, 100,000 for the 6th Ward, the sidewalks, grants to businesses and nonprofits, and open lands, $100,000 for an open lands position to be matched with a grant that we intend to the city in partnership with Pickley Pear, but that's a commitment still in discussions. And then so that's June 8th, 5 p.m. June 14th, 6 p.m. I would, June 14th at 6 p.m. I will share to you all the actual tool itself so you can start. Well, no, I'm going to take that back. So June 8th, we're going to get submit your items. June 10th, I will send back out to you all the tool for you to submit, so June 10th. And then on the 14th, if you would by 6 p.m. get to me your requests. On June 16th, we have an admin meeting where I'll bring those to you all. And I'll go back again one more time. And then June 18th, your actual budget amendment requests, if you could turn those in, then I can turn around with with Thomas, some recommended, a list of recommended motions based on what you've seen so far, what I've seen from all of you, so that you would have them in advance of the 28th meeting. So you'd all have them. So we have a week to turn around those motions and whatever that list looks like of amendments. So I'll go back, start from the beginning. June 8th, 5 p.m. submit to me your general fund savings. June 10th, 5 p.m. I will send to you the balancing act. Then June 14th, back to me, your actual clicked in submittals in balancing act. June 16th, we'll go over them in the admin meeting for consensus. And then June 18th, submit your budget amendments to me, and then we'll make sure that week of the 25th, you have them in a full list so you all can contemplate them before the 28th meeting. Does that satisfy what you were hoping, Commissioner O'Loughlin and other commissioners?
Thank you.
Yeah, Mayor, I think that works. I mean, I'd be interested to hear if folks feel like submitting by the 18th makes sense. I would imagine that we sort of want kind of this to be the finite list, right? So that we're seeing everything in advance. Does that give commissioners enough time to put forward their recommendations, or, would there, again, my impression was that there were things coming up pretty at the last minute, last budget. So I just don't want commissioners to feel like, well, now I haven't had a chance to do, propose something. I just wanted them even like a day in advance of consideration. So if others feel like they are comfortable with the 18th, I'm comfortable with it, but.
Okay, so. Thank you,
Mr. Mayor?
Commissioner. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Commissioner.
Quick question for the city manager. I'm fine with that June 18th date. Is there enough time for the commission to ask staff questions about all amendments before that, before the 25th or the 28th, I guess?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I was actually, that's why I was putting a week in there, thinking that I suspect if on Friday, the 18th, you all submit a significant list that results in a significant change to the preliminary budget that I've submitted to you all as the manager's budget, that we as a staff will need to be able to share to you what that impact is, because I'm not sure you would be able to see that. So that's why I was looking at that week. So if you would like, I can get to you all by the 23rd, a quick analysis of the impact. Do you think that's reasonable, Sheila, in taking in the amendments and being able to revise kind of the cascading effects so that on the 23rd that we can send it back out to them?
I think it's going to depend on the requests, Manager Hollishock.
So we'll do our best, I think, to turn around something to you on the 23rd, but it just depends on the list. We'll do our best to get you the full list by then.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Director Kanopke, what have you?
Mayor and Commissioners, I just wanted to maybe propose an interim solution to the Henderson crossing. We could install a solar pedestrian actuated rectangular rapid flash beacon similar to the one at the crossing at Benton there. It would be an interim condition and could move forward with, a design if that's the commission's will for the bridge at the same time, but it would enhance that crossing for pedestrian safety.
Thank you. I think it would. Thanks. Any final comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, if I
Gee,
may.
I really
I know you're ready to go. I just want to make sure that I close the loop on a last item and in the big picture, tonight before I leave, I will be submitting the preliminary budget. We've put together a list of changes between this last draft and substantive as well as non-substantive. So you all feel comfortable that you know what those changes look like between this final, oops, we lost Commissioner Logan, I think, but between this second draft and then the next one that's being submitted on June 7th as the preliminary budget. Thank you. That's it. There it is.
Can I
At
ask
this
a
time, the floor is open for public comments. Madam Clerk, do we have any hands raised for public comments?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I have no hands raised and I see no written public comment.
Thank you. We'll give them another 10 seconds. Okay, Commissioner O'Loughlin, any final comments? I see you wanted to raise something.
Oh, I was just wondering to the city manager, so our past document that included like the letter to the mayor and commission included the city commission strategic outcomes. And I didn't see that reflected in the new message. And I was just wondering, are you incorporating that into what you're putting forward as the preliminary budget? Are you meshing these two, or like we got just an entirely different letter in this last one?
Yes, and those are letters from me to you. You will get your own separate one. That one has been drafted. Danae has that, I believe, and I'm not sure if it's been sent around yet, Danae, for comment, but there will be two. There will be one from me to you as the submittal, and then one to you on final that comes in on the 28th. So
okay.
So it's really up to you. I get it's a different process, and I've even shortened, just so you know, the message will look different just in reflection on what it is that and where we're at in this process.
Thank you. At this time, this meeting is adjourned.